We're meant to help people in an emergency. But what's changed is now people are in an emergency every single month because the income they have is nowhere near covering the actual costs that it would take to live their life.
Well, there was a lot of announcements that happened yesterday, from the Bank of Canada to housing to food prices, crime, Joe Rogan, Pierre Poilievre, the mainstream media, you name it, it happened yesterday. So without further ado, let's dive into the news. So I figured we'd just start off with the biggest story that happened yesterday, which was the announcement from Pierre Poilievre that he ended up going onto the Joe Rogan podcast. Pierre posted this on his Twitter saying, "Fought for Canadian workers and Canadian interests on the world's biggest podcast. Thank you, Joe Rogan, for an amazing conversation. Let's get tariff-free trade." And then he added a link so that you could get access to this first. And if you take a look at the photo, it already has almost 2 million views on it, which is probably Pierre's most viral photo. I'm not sure. But as you could expect, a lot of the comments are saying he should have done this a year ago. He should have done this a year ago. It's a little bit too late. A lot of people wanted him to go on the PBD podcast or Sean Ryan, Joe Rogan, as we already know. But at the time, he was focused more on the economy and what was actually affecting people here, because the liberals were the ones that were painting Trump as the issue, whereas we've known what's been going on for the past 10 years here in Canada had nothing to do with Trump. It was all with the liberals, and that's what Pierre was trying to push. Obviously, axe attacks, that was really successful. So much so that as soon as Carney became prime minister, that's what he did. He axed the carbon tax, so he says. But Pierre was getting a lot of flack for not doing the American media. I also was a little bit up in the air. I felt like maybe it wouldn't have hurt him too much, but at the same time, we know how they painted him, and very much Trump-like. That's how our media pushed it. Although Carney was doing a lot of American media, he announced his whole leadership campaign on the Jon Stewart program, not a Canadian program, an American program. And yesterday on CTV, they actually brought that up. Well, Vashi brought that up as the political pundits decided to talk about what this all means and how Pierre is going to do and the repercussions of this and that, because only Pierre has to worry about what he does. They never talk about the things that Carney does. But as I said, this is what they started saying about Pierre.
Sebastian, your thoughts on, I remember during the campaign, I think there was something about whether or not this would come to fruition. It ultimately didn't. There was some talk of whether that was on purpose or whatever. What is the strategy here? It seems obvious. There's 15 million people who listen to this podcast, but tell me your thoughts on that.
Wow, incredible news. I'm glad to hear that happened. I look forward to listening to Mr. Poilievre push a common sense agenda, one of free trade and a tariff-free trade, not just, by the way, to an American audience where this podcast is very big, but I believe it is probably the most listened to podcast also in Canada, so a great effort to reach those voters. I think, look, this comes on the heels of a successful trip on the part of Mr. Poilievre to the United States. I know he's still delivering or set to deliver a keynote address in New York, but we've seen him put forward and pitch a very coherent and competent plan in Detroit and in Texas, recently meeting with the governor of Texas. So I think really showing a very statesman-like attitude, showing Canadians that this is someone who can step into the role of prime minister on day one, and someone who is ready to champion Canada, champion our industry, and champion successful trade partnership with our greatest ally. Something Mr. Carney has been significantly lacking. I know that's the topic that you want to touch on here. He has set for himself not one but two deadlines that have blown through to reach a deal. He has not reached that deal, and seemingly we have at every stage seen that there are setbacks in that trade relationship. Despite what he wants to set up trade with other countries, this is a critical relationship for us, and we need him for the sake of Canada and for the sake of our jobs, for him to show some progress on that.
Now, love him or hate him, you got to give it to Sebastian. He always holds Mark Carney and the Liberals' feet to the flame. But I'm going to skip a little bit ahead to where Vashi points out the fact that Carney decided to go on American media and not Canadian media when he announced this. Before we get into Sharon Carr, who seems very delusional as always, thinking that Pierre's just going to be talking to his base, that this is a nothing burger, that going on Joe Rogan, the biggest podcast that has over 15 million listeners, is just going to be the same. Whereas we had 8.1 million people vote conservative last election, and Joe Rogan still reaches almost double that amount of people that voted for us. But to her, it's nothing. And even Vashi kind of looks at her like, what are you talking about?
The fact that Pierre Poilievre is going on Joe Rogan is only logical to me.
I think it was Jon Stewart, if I recall.
Oh, sorry about that.
But that's okay. Your point is very well taken, though. I remember at the time thinking, why an American show, not a Canadian one, Jamie? But it worked. I remember the degree to which people were talking about that appearance after, and it's hard to take away from the fact that Jon Stewart has a big certain type of audience, and Joe Rogan has an even bigger certain type of audience.
If I can just jump in here, obviously, and I think you mentioned this, the devil's going to be in the details here, because you mentioned it. One listener of that podcast is Donald Trump in the White House. And so it's going to be very interesting to hear what Pierre Poilievre has to say in this interview, because if something goes sideways, you know full well Donald Trump is going to jump on that, and that's probably going to mean some bad days, not only for Pierre Poilievre, but for Canada as a whole.
Well, I think the stakes, to Louis' point, Sharon, the stakes are actually very high for that reason, right? Not just from a political perspective for Mr. Poilievre, but kind of for the pragmatic perspective of our entire country. And I will say, if you look at his appearances in the United States so far, there's been nothing off message from what the Liberals, the type of message the Liberals would be delivering, or anything where, and he's actually said this, I think, on Mansbridge's podcast, like he's not criticizing the government in other places. So it's been consistent so far. If there's anyone who's going to try, I don't know if he will, but like Rogan gets a lot of wild things out of people. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but it's a risky environment.
Well, it could be high gain, high risk. Yeah. But I think, listen, if the goal here was to get him in front of the most number of people to hear his message, Joe Rogan has 15.5 million followers on X. It's the most listened to podcast. But all of that being said, it is the same people that he is already that are his base. He's not expanding his circle of who he's coming to. And just to be clear, Joe Rogan isn't someone who has editorial standards. He's not a journalist. He's a podcaster and has constantly in the past been criticized for a lot of the misinformation he spreads. So if there was someone who can pull out a bit of controversy, I would say there's going to be a lot of ears and eyes on this podcast, because like Lee said, it's high risk. One small thing off, we know people like Donald Trump listen to this. The only thing that is his advantage is that he is not in government. He is the opposition leader. The president has previously kind of negatively spoken about Mr. Poilievre. So there is risk to his personal brand here. But if you were asking me, did he get in front of a whole new set of crowds? No, I already think he's pandering to the same listener group of the Joe Rogan style.
Well, we'll see. I think a lot of people listen to that podcast.
15 million plus. So
yeah. Okay. I got to leave it there. Guys,
So you see what I'm talking about, how they try to downplay this? Even Vashi was like, dude, that's a huge audience that he's going to be addressing. But they're trying to say, well, Joe Rogan, he's not known for his editorial journalistic standards. You could say the same for Jon Stewart when Mark Carney went on that show. The guy is a comedian / TV host. He's not a journalist. He's not a investigator. He's not a reporter. He's not anything like that. But there was no problem there. It's only because Pierre Poilievre did it. But again, they're still trying to downplay this, say, oh, this is just Joe Rogan. It's not a big deal. But I bet you if he had gone on a year ago, like we had all thought maybe he was going to, that would have been the number one thing in the headlines. Joe Rogan goes on a far-right podcast or MAGA podcast or mini Trump, whatever the case may be. That's how they would have painted it. But now a year later, because of how Pierre's approaching this, they're trying to say, oh, well, this is nothing. And even on the CBC, they did the same thing last night, where they tried to discredit Joe Rogan by saying, oh, well, he's had issues with vaccines before, or the things that he said about vaccines. And even the conservative on the panel, he was talking about Joe Rogan and ivermectin, as if he's trying to bring forth this horse dewormer narrative yet again.
Yeah, Tim, I mean, there's a risk of being associated with someone like Rogan, who is a vaccine skeptic, someone who endorsed Trump.
Ivermectin, yeah, worked great.
Right, some controversial opinions on things. So, just doing the show means that in some way you are tied to him, although, of course, they have different views on things. But it is a way to appeal to members of the conservative base, right, who may be feeling a bit disaffected by looking at some of these polling numbers and seeing that they're not riding as high as they once were, right? It's a way to get young men in particular maybe dialed in, and that's the principal audience for that podcast.
As well as a whole bunch of liberals and lefties who are going to be interested in what Pierre Poilievre has to say over the normal 2 to 3 hour podcast that Joe Rogan does, sometimes even 4 hours. Especially when they're unscripted. I mean, sometimes Joe lets the guest kind of just riff, but Joe will also have times where he's very question-oriented just to find out a little bit more information. This is their first time meeting. Who knows what Pierre's going to say? But they're going to be tuning in as well. It's not just his base or young men, whatever the heck he said. And even on the CBC panel, they talked about it, saying, well, we're going to be seeing what he has to say, because when he gets a little bit more relaxed and less structured, he could potentially slip up and say something like he did with the RCMP comment. They're already talking about the Northern Perspective interview that he did in trying to throw that out, that maybe Pierre's going to have a slip up, because this is how they want to put it in the mainstream media. They want to just paint him as this anti-Canada mini Trump guy. And when JP Tasker is talking about people being disheartened by the numbers, you look at this stat at the end of March. Justin Trudeau, this is his record. Since March 2025, this is Carney's record, yet his approval is huge. And why is that? Because of the way the mainstream media paints him, like he's some sort of saint. They never hold his feet to the fire. And this is the problem. This is why people don't like it. But when you actually look around, open your eyes, go outside, you can see the prices of food. You can see the prices of housing. That opening clip that I showed you, that's about the food bank. Take a listen to the rest of the clip.
Food bank usage here has doubled overall since the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and they say around 30% of their users have jobs. Another concerning number, the food bank is serving 35% more seniors than they were in 2023.
It makes me sad in some ways that in a country where we have so much, that we have seniors who still need to rely on a food bank.
Yes, it is extremely sad to hear that, but what do you expect after 10 to 11 years of the Liberal government doing what they're doing? And don't get me wrong, this issue that's going on in Iran and with the US, I'm sure there's some factor there, but not as of recent, even though that's what they're trying to peddle right now, saying that the prices of housing is due to this conflict in Iran, even though it started at the end of February, and we've been seeing a steady decline in the housing market since way before that.
More than 1 million households are set to renew their mortgage this year, according to the CMHC, Canada's national housing agency. And the Iran war, along with the changing rhetoric around it, are causing big changes to mortgage rates.
Canadians seem to be cautious because of economic uncertainty caused by the trade war with the U.S., the war in Iran as well. The Bank of Canada holding its main rate at 2.25% this morning, despite uncertainty and threats to inflation from the conflict in the Middle East. Here to talk about how this decision will impact Canadians.
So there you go. You see it now on global news. You see it on Bloomberg. You hear it in the House of Commons, them saying that the war in Iran is a major issue into why people can't afford houses. Like, this is what they're pushing out there, and people actually believe this nonsense. Now, I do agree that the oil situation will trickle down, especially into the grocery prices. This is something that was talked about.
Comes back to the forefront because if inflation starts to go up too much because of oil prices, because with oil prices means groceries go up, means everything goes up. So therefore, if inflation gets back to 2022 levels, Bank of Canada is going to have a really tough decision, which is, are they going to have to raise interest rates? So I think if this war prolongs itself, the fear is that interest rates are going to go up, not come down, but only if it prolongs itself. Hopefully it's over in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And if it's over in the next 2 and 3 weeks and oil prices come back down to earth, then all of a sudden the potential for interest rates to come down is likely in the second half of this year.
And the Bank of Canada actually today, when they came out with their rate change, or that they're not changing the rate, they were asked about this and how energy can affect this. And they openly went against what the Liberal government has been trying to peddle in the House of Commons. Take a listen to what Julie DeBruisten said not too long ago, and then listen to what they said in yesterday's meeting.
Because, Mr. Speaker, everyone knows that when the government charges higher fuel and carbon taxes on fertilizer, fuel, and equipment for farmers, food processors, and truckers, it drives up the cost of food. And it's going to get worse as long as these Liberals keep on hiking these taxes. Canada now has the highest food price inflation and the worst shrinking economy in the G7. It's gotten worse since this Prime Minister took office. We can't control what's happening abroad, but we can fix things here at home. Why won't these Liberals reverse their taxes so Canadians can afford to eat?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, I'm standing up for my daily reminder that studies show that the industrial carbon price adds zero to the cost of food. So if they want to speak about taxes, though, I can point out that on this side of the House, what did we do? We cut them. If they want to talk about imaginary taxes, go ahead. But we're going to make sure that we support Canadians with real measures.
Yeah, I mean, the governor mentioned this in his opening remarks. I mean, we're starting from a position where food inflation continues to outpace headline inflation a bit. It's certainly adding to that sense of affordability that Canadians are feeling. Energy shocks can affect food prices. And again, it comes back to the previous question. It depends a lot on duration. We import a lot of our fresh foods, so transportation costs add to food costs. There's inputs to fertilizer costs that are being affected by the war in Iran. So that if that persists, that could have a longer term effect on food inflation too. So again, we're back to it's a bit early to tell what the effects on food inflation will be, but certainly energy is a big input cost to food.
Now, to me, that's exactly what the Conservatives are pointing out. If you're putting a tax on the fertilizer, on the tractors, on the farm equipment, on the trailers and the transport trucks that are delivering the food, the whole food chain relies on oil, gas, and diesel. If you're going to put an industrial carbon tax on that, it's going to have a reflection on the price of your food. Because if it's happening globally, if those are external factors that can affect us domestically, like they were talking about the fertilizer coming from Iran and all that kind of stuff, then it definitely can affect us domestically if we have the exact same taxes. Now, they will claim that the taxes don't come into play unless you pass a certain threshold. But then that stifles our production in our country, because if companies try to avoid reaching that threshold or going over the threshold, they won't produce more. And that is our number one problem in Canada, is our production. The Bank of Canada has talked about that time and time again. So we're basically tying a weight in our foot and trying to stay afloat. It doesn't work. They need to get rid of the industrial carbon tax like the Conservatives are talking about. But one last thing that I wanted to point out is when they were talking about mortgages and renewals, how many people are going to be defaulting? Here in Ontario, they're talking about probably a huge swath of people who are technically drowning right now because of the unaffordability of it.
Well, I mean, it's creeping up, always worrisome, but when does it become,
Well, the real impact of it is that when a house is sold under power sale today, that's a radically discounted price. And because comparables are set at the margins, it pulls the value of the whole neighborhood down. Like if one house is sold dramatically under what was expected, the value in the whole neighborhood drops. So we have seen this constant fall in prices in Ontario, house price in Ontario. This is a major contributor to it.
And it's showing no signs of abating?
None.
All right. And so, I mean, this puts a lot of pressure. I mean, there are people who would have bought, some of them would have bought in the last few years, and they could be underwater right now, couldn't they, with their mortgages?
Oh, we suspect that most people in 905 who bought in late 2021 and early 2022 are underwater already.
Well, with that being said, let me know what you guys think about all this in the comment section below. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Again, double check if you're subscribed. And I just found out about this hype thing. If you can, hype up the video. That would be fantastic. As always, I'd love to hear from you guys, and I will catch you guys on the next one. Thanks so much.